Welcome back, everybody. If you enjoy what the JLJ is doing, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon or PayPal. All of the things are in the description. You can look below to find them. Today I want to talk about suspense versus surprise. Oftentimes we think of shock and we want to keep people interested, and the way we do that is by shocking them with some revelation or some idea. But really we want to break that down a little further and think about how do we take the idea of shock and make it more accessible, and also understand how we can manipulate it to keep people interested even if the shock, quote unquote, is not so large. And so for that we're going to talk about Hitchcock, who was perhaps the master of suspense, and he broke it down as following. So shock is something like a deus ex machina. You know, in Greek tragedy, sometimes the gods would come down and fix the situation. So there'd be a problem, something would look inevitable, and all of a sudden some god would come down and change the things to make them better. Whereas Hitchcock was a fan of suspense, which is the idea that it's not something inevitable that is changed by some force that comes from outside. Rather, it's this idea of thinking about the ensuing incident from the end product forward. Meaning, if there's a bomb sitting somewhere, then there's two ways to approach that bomb. Either the reader knows about the bomb from the beginning and goes through the story waiting for the bomb to go off, or the reader has no idea that there's a bomb, and all of a sudden at the end the bomb either goes off or doesn't, and you have this revelation at the end. And really, suspense is when the reader or the participant knows what's going to happen and then has to wait to see what transpires to get to that place. So for example, a story could start with, at 4 p.m. a bomb was going to go off. John started to discover this plot at 2 p.m., right? And all of a sudden now, from 2 to 4, you have an entire story of what's going to happen with the bomb. We know it's going off. We know there's a problem. And now what happens? Whereas in a surprise type story, you would have John starts his investigation at 2 p.m. and he saw where the road would take him. And then all of a sudden at 4 p.m., the bomb either goes off or doesn't, and John discovers it. And the question is, why would you do one versus the other? So I think suspense is a way to keep people engaged in a more natural manner, because it sort of allows them to feel like they're in control to a degree, but also excited and not understanding what might occur. Whereas surprise makes them makes them have a shock, but it doesn't really make the reader feel like they were in on the secret, or it doesn't really include them in the process. And I think really suspense is the way to go if you're, starting out with a story that you want to sort of have things occur and twists and turns. Really, suspense is actually more engaging to the reader because they feel like they were involved in the process. Chekhov also has a piece about this where his famous advice is, if you put a gun on the table, it has to go off by the end of the play. This is the same idea, right? That you sort of introduce these things that are going to explode or shoot or whatever sort of metaphor of reveal you're going to use that have to occur, and the reader is waiting for them to occur, or the observer is waiting for them to occur, and that's what keeps them engaged in the story throughout the whole time. Whereas when you have a surprise at the end, yeah, they remember it for a minute, but then the sort of whole purpose of the art gets dismissed, right? With the surprise, once the surprise is ruined, that's the end of the piece. Whereas suspense, there is nothing to ruin. It's the experience that you're highlighting, and the experience is something that can be enjoyed over and over, even if you know how it's going to end, right? That's the craft of it all, is how to take something that people know what's going to happen and still make it interesting to them. And that takes, I think, more skill than just not giving everybody all the information and then sort of all of a sudden at the end figuring it out. And so that's sort of a lot of times what takes people out of certain genres of writing, is really that the idea that the information is not present and you can't even try and figure it out, and sort of you're being taken for a ride. And I guess if you're into that, suspend disbelief, that's something you might want to, really, really go into, which is that people sometimes do want to turn off everything and they don't want to know everything, and all of a sudden it sort of, occurs to them at the end, and oh, wow, what a surprise, right? But for me personally, I find it more engaging and more rewarding to have the suspense aspect down. Hemingway also has a similar point, which is that you shouldn't keep writing once you know what's going to happen. And this comes back to our earlier discussions around artistry and the art itself, and how really what you're trying to do is accomplish artistry through your writing. And artistry is about the process. And so here you're doing the same thing, which is, if you're not discovering anything new, if you know where it's sort of how it's going to be saved at the end, and you sort of get there, and all of a sudden something comes down and saves it, you're not really enjoying the process of the art. You're not really thinking about how we got there and sort of the artifice around language and technique of story and story building that gets you to where you want to go. And so that's where suspense, again, I think is superior. So now that we've talked about the difference between suspense and surprise, you should really test it out for yourself. And so today's prompt is going to be along those lines. Write a piece and then either start it with a suspenseful beginning or write the piece and then have a surprise at the end. Read them back and see which one you prefer. And I would love to see whichever version you like better. The JLJ would love to read. Feel free to post it below, to send it in as a submission. And again, if you like what we're doing here, we post a video every 7th and 21st of the month, as well as the podcast on the 15th, the new journal on the 1st. You can support us all at Patreon or PayPal. And again, you can like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.